Welcome to Definitely Maybe Agile, the podcast where Peter Madison and David Shurock discuss the complexities of adopting new ways of working at scale. Hello, Dave. How are you today?
Peter, good to catch up with you. So I hear this is one of the first snowy weekends in Toronto.
Yes, yeah, somewhat unexpectedly. It was supposed to last about half a day, and
Yeah.
it's now supposed to last all the way through the next day. So it's
Okay, that's quite a lot of snow. I
yeah.
just can reassure you that here in Vancouver, it is as wet and damp as is expected for this time of year. So,
Yes, yes. So you get your precipitation in the non-snow kind.
exactly. Yeah.
So
Right.
so
What's the topic? Product management. We just briefly touched on this. We've got some ideas around this. I think so. Let me just put context around this one, Peter. We're teaching AI, Gen AI in our courses. Whenever we do public courses, private courses, we're bringing large language models into all of the exercises for how people use it, what they get the benefits for from using Gen AI tools. And one of the things that's really apparent is product management, product ownership courses. There is a lot of documentation expected from a product owner or product manager, kind of doing the basics, getting the grounding, the foundations laid before they start developing or once they pick up a product, making sure they understand it. A natural home for Gen AI, large language models and the like to be used.
yes.
Discuss.
Discuss. Okay. Well, so I mean, fleshing out the ideas, the concepts, or even ideating, like, how can I prove whether this is a good idea? Like, where could I go looking for this? The ability to gather large amounts of information, do research, a lot of these pieces suddenly become an awful lot easier with these models. It becomes a lot easier to get your hands on that information, pull it together. There is a need to go and check the references and validate the information that's given
Mhm.
back, but it can even just the simple act of doing that can sort of spark the imagination potentially and maybe make you think of things in a different light.
So certainly and this is one of the things I find is we're always talking about putting a vision statement together. Just if I just pick one artifact
Mm-hmm.
as an example, and of course, if you talk with most product owners, they're brand new at the role and they're looking at the vision statement very briefly, or they've been in the role for ages and their vision statement is hanging around somewhere, but it's very rarely right in front of the team and something that's referenced all the time.
Yep.
So being able to generate that based on a lot of different things, being able to get that pulled together and validated becomes so much quicker and easier. And that's just one example, one single artifact. So as you kind of carry on, we can build out a number of different things, what the goals are for the quarter, what that kind of delivery roadmap might look like. And of course, everyone's talking about writing user stories and shoving them straight into Jira, basically, or whatever tool that you're using. So lots of opportunity there. What do you watch for? Where does it not work or where does it go wrong?
Well, I think it works very, very well in most instances, and I think it's getting better all the time. There is a need to ensure that you're prompting it well, that you're providing it sufficient information, so that especially if it's going and creating user stories, they need to be reviewed and validated. Are we actually building out things we need to do? There is a view, of course, that eventually, if you've got enough robustness in that and you've prompted it, then you can start to get more of a flow through
Yeah,
from that into, well, why don't we just have it build something we can actually
yeah.
look at and see if that's the thing that we want? Then we can start to build out and test from there, which becomes an interesting way of being able to move it forward. To do that, of course, you've got to have a lot of the pipe in place to make that possible,
Yeah.
so that
Yeah.
so things will stand up and you can actually access them and you can try them out, which of course requires network access and authentication and identity management and a whole bunch of other things that
Yeah.
we sometimes forget about.
Well, I actually really like going upstream as much as, I mean, everybody's looking downstream and that makes a
Yep.
lot of sense. But what I've often seen and worked with a lot of product owners and product managers where they just don't have the time to be able to kind of sit down and document their product strategy and clearly articulate what's the vision behind what they're trying to do, what the outcomes should be, what the personas are, things like this. And these are all great practices. We know in order to get product market fit, in order to build products that really aren't just another Me Too product, but that really resonate with customers, that become these sort of profitable digital experiences that we all really want to get to, you need to do the groundwork. So it's always surprising how many organizations, how many product managers and product owners just don't have that time. They may have given it some consideration early on, but they've not really updated it. They don't keep it relevant. They don't keep an eye on the market as much as they perhaps should do. And this certainly, large language models give you a lot of a leg up there.
And I think another way of framing that too is that very often one of the things that is holding back the teams who are trying to build out the solution is that they don't have sufficient guidance or sufficient time with the product owners or sufficient communication to be able to decide what direction do I go in. Like I've hit this juncture and I need to be able to make a decision. But I've got one product owner spread across 5 different teams.
Yeah.
I can't get access to them because I got this tiny slice of their time. And so it becomes very difficult because when organizations underinvest in that product management space, you quite often see that. And so I agree with you. And I think it enables the creation of the assets which make that, which amplifies the strength of that, which means you've got I like to talk about there's a richness of design information that's now suddenly available, both from
Yeah.
like product design and product management
Yeah.
type perspective. So you can start to understand more richly what is it that we are actually trying to build here.
I think there's also, just as you're describing that, one word I'll just mention this very briefly because is the word succinct. The danger is, we've had this conversation before, but the danger is that because I can create these artifacts, I'm going to end up with, a 20-page document trying to outline the product. Keep it short. Just because you can create a lot doesn't mean we should, because some poor soul somewhere, if it's going to be used, it has to be read. If it's going to be read, it needs to be short.
Well, of course, they're just going to feed it. If it's 20 pages long, they're just going to feed it into an LLM
Yes.
to make it succinct, and then they're going to miss all of that beautiful nuance that you had the LLM create for you. What? So yes, there's definitely that point that it has to be right size. This is actually a whole other piece of the problem that it's great that we're creating all of this, but that also means that we've now if you still have the same number of humans trying to digest and understand all of this material, then that becomes another source of cognitive overload that we didn't necessarily have before when all of the user stories were one word or maybe a sentence.
Well, there's a continuum there. We want somewhere in the middle, right? We don't
We
need
want
essays.
somewhere in the
We don't
middle.
need essays. We don't need one word requirements, right?
I do agree, though. Moving to the left, there's a whole space even further
Yes.
to the left that we should explore.
Well, and one of the things that I'm finding is really, it's almost an essential for this sort of prompting and getting lots of information back is we have a tendency, if we're not careful, we accept what comes back as if it's true.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been talk of hallucinations. This is when the large language models sort of make something up to please you. And that's definitely not as prevalent as it has been in the past for many of the models, but it's still there. And one of the kind of tricks, if you like, that we're kind of standardizing in our organization is writing down what you expect first. And I don't mean like the full essay, but what are the key points you expect to see in, say, a vision statement? Or, let's say if you're looking for success measures, you're going to map out some of the things that you want first. What we've found is if you tell the large language model, give it some guidance, it will never let go of them because it kind of weights your idea higher in many cases. So I find not telling it what you're thinking, but having it written down at least means I can now critically evaluate what comes back and see if we're sort of moving in the same direction or whether it's just making something up for some reason, whatever it might be.
Yeah, the coach in us understands the concept of leading questions, and LLMs are very, very prone to leading questions.
They are, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like, what type of
Um,
blue button would you like? Oh, all the buttons should be blue. It's like,
yeah. And yeah, and kind of shaking it by the shoulders to try and get it to try and innovate around it is difficult, right?
yeah.
And that's actually an interesting comment. Just of sometimes we think we need to give it all of this information, and it's quite interesting how little information we need to provide,
Hmm.
and how it's much more important. And in fact, I was reading over the weekend and came across the idea of enabling constraints again. Something we're very familiar with. We've talked
Yep.
about enabling constraints many times. Well, in some ways, the constraints that we want to put around our large language model as it's going away to do some work for us are these concept of enabling constraints, things open-ended that they can explore around rather than, definitive hard edges that they can't go past, because that tends to change the way the model behaves.
Yep. Indeed. Some of the other interesting pieces you can do as well, depending on what you're trying to get it to do, is playing with temperatures and understanding.
Yes.
So lower
Yeah.
temperature is more
Yeah.
expansive, and
Yeah.
you get wider guesses and stuff, and higher ones being
Yeah.
all the way around.
But
The
typically you have to be you're coding, you're interfacing, basically coding to get access to those dials, if that, or those parameters, right?
or some web interfaces, depends what you're
Yeah,
interacting with. You can also tell it in some cases too.
yeah,
So,
yeah. Fair enough.
to start to behave, but basically you can start to control, like, how do you want me to respond? Like, and
Well, and from a product manager perspective, like if I'm exploring where should my product
Mhm.
develop and go, then adjusting that temperature, making the temperature higher so that you get much more variability, much more sort
Mhm.
of like broader range of options coming back is really quite powerful.
Yep, and the generally the prompts that we put into the system as well, like the underlying prompts, like how are you guiding it? Well, that helps sort of set the scene as well, and understanding. So I guess kind of what we're saying there is understanding how these systems work as a tool.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
how are you
well,
going to apply them to this?
yeah, and it's interesting as we're discussing this, because certainly what we've experienced on the training side is many of the other roles don't need to be as broadly sort
No.
of functionally operating these large language models at such a range of different ways of looking at it. If I'm trying to get user stories out, I need that temperature to be low. I don't need them to be making things off to the side. I need them to be quite tightly focused. But if I'm exploring, who may be the personas for a particular product or service that we're building, or what could we build to differentiate our product or service from the competitors that we're competing with, we want to be going in the other direction, broadening what can be delivered, what responses we're going to get.
Yep. Another interesting piece is context windows, like, because
Yeah.
the somebody I work with at one of the organizations calls her LLM Lucy, like Lucy from 50 First Dates, because she only remembers so much and then it forgets.
Yeah. 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 That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, which is, but as funny as it is something to keep in mind when
Yeah.
working with these systems and keeping an eye on that. Although they do have very large context windows in a lot of
Yeah.
cases these days. So,
Yeah.
but you will, if you find yourself with an ongoing
Yeah.
conversation, it doesn't have to get all the way to the end before it starts going a little squirrely and
Yeah.
starts just making up crazy things or just going around in
Yes.
circles and hallucinating. So the best thing to do there is just start again,
Yeah. Yeah.
start a new one. And there are ways of bringing stuff to, like, summarize this and bring it across and do other
Yeah.
pieces like that to start to. But
Yeah.
again, all of this is just really details of how you work with the tools to get the best results. These all are ways of where you can see that they will help somebody in that product
Yeah.
to,
Augmenting their role and maybe helping
yeah.
them kind of get things done that they weren't necessarily getting time to. I'm also interested in the other side of it, which is what are the things that we would never have done
Mhm.
because it's too time consuming, too expensive to go out and do. Whether it's just one of the things that really came to mind in the last couple of weeks is if we come up with a vision statement for a product or and articulate a clear identity for a product that we're building, can we use the large language model to go out and look at competitors and come back and say, are we really differentiating?
Hmm.
Are we not doing, if we're in a financial institution, a bank, well, every bank has a mobile app. How do you make your mobile app in any way a differentiation rather than just a me too service that you've got or product you've got?
Yeah, and prompting it to be critical of what's wrong with these
Yeah,
ideas.
yeah,
Where give me the pros and cons, or various other different ways of prompting it to get more out of the response. The prompt you're describing there, I was using just last week for a
yeah,
startup's product
yeah,
to say, okay, what are the other products like this in the marketplace? How does this differ? What are the things? And to your point, I said, here's the website. What do you think it
yeah.
does?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, you get some eye-opening responses. I mean, some of them
you do.
is exactly what you think it should be saying, and other times that comes up with some quite different interpretations.
Which is valuable in itself. You're saying, so wait a minute, you drew that from?
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah. And then I would say just building on that whole kind of devil's advocate, act as a critic here. There are lots of other persona. You can give this persona to the large language model. So what is really interesting now is if you give it as personas that you're actually using
Yes.
and see what it sees as the benefits, the strengths, and so on of your product or even of your competitors' products to see how those personas might be interpreting different products around you. Again, information is, we've got to be careful. We're not talking to real customers. So we're getting a sort of an 80-20 perspective of what might be going on. I still think we should be talking to customers as often as we can to validate these ideas that we're coming up with.
Yep. Well, exactly. And I think that's possibly one of the main things that becomes true. Like, what can you do with that extra time you've got back? Well, we can go talk to the customers.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
The
Yeah.
thing that we wish we had time for, but we were too busy doing all of these other things,
Yeah.
which now we can go let the AI take care of. Uh,
Great.
so, with that in mind, we like to sum this up with 3 points, right?
Oh,
So,
yes.
go for it.
Well, so I think one of the points is that role of product owner or product manager. If we're using our favorite large language model the same way over and over again, there is many more things that we can be doing by exploring just exactly how to use those prompts to adjust things like temperature, to change the role, the personality of the LLM as we're interacting with it for different needs. So I think there's that need to be more aware of how to structure prompts in a way to get what you're looking for at the end, because there are many, you're not just doing the same thing over and over again.
Yes, yeah, indeed. I think some of the important tooling there is like thinking about, well, asking it like, what's wrong with this idea? Like the
Yeah.
critical piece. So like I think a lot of the times, I think partly because what it feeds back to us is a bunch of, you're wonderful, that's a fantastic idea. Trying to turn that off is difficult, but you can do it if
Yeah.
you ask really nicely.
Yeah.
And but expanding on that to say, okay, be critical. Like, what's wrong with this idea? Why does this not work? What might I do to differentiate this in a crowded marketplace? Like, what would this person over here want from this product? And it's very good for doing that type of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. And very rapidly doing that as well. So it's the
Yeah.
sort of thing that would take a lot more time if you're going to do that in the sort of in a real context. I'm going to close out with my sort of thing that I talk to anybody when we're talking about prompts and so on, which is um, not leaving all the cognition to the machine
Hmm.
and making it, what do you expect to see coming back so that you're in a position where you've already thought a little about the problem, you've got some ideas, you've got context, experience, plenty of things to kind of bring to the table. What do you expect to see? Then when you get the response, you're already in that critical evaluation mode of looking at it instead of just accepting what comes back.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a wonderful practice to have
Yeah.
because otherwise you can fall into the trap because you're very busy of just saying, "Ah, it
Yeah.
looks good enough, ship
Yeah.
it,"
Yeah.
and that sometimes that can be not a good idea.
Perfect. Right. A great way of wrapping things up. So, again, Peter, thanks again for leading the conversation.
Yep, awesome. It was wonderful to talk again, and wait until next time.
Till next time. Thanks.
You've been listening to Definitely Maybe Agile, the podcast where your hosts, Peter Madison and David Sharrock, focus on the art and science of digital, agile, and DevOps at scale.